Hello, New Age Christian family. This is Austin Fletcher, and today we're doing the first episode of a series of episodes that I want to start doing with fellow New Age Christians. I keep regularly mentioning that I keep using words like we and us when I talk about New Age Christianity and the community and the projects that we're working on, quote unquote. And so today I want to introduce you to one of those we's. Her name is Kayleen Hale, and I've mentioned her a few times in previous episodes as being a spiritual daughter of mine. We've been in relationship for 4 years now?
At least.
So, yeah, it's to kind of give you context for what to expect in this episode is there are a few of us at this point, and it's a growing number of people that would call themselves New Age Christians. And that title alone, I ran into an old friend of mine at the movie theater. Actually, we were together 2 nights ago. An old friend of ours, and we were talking about doing this podcast episode, and they were like, "Oh, really? What's it called?" New Age Christianity. And the look on his face was priceless.
The reaction, yeah.
So, if you're one of those people that calls yourself a New Age Christian, then clearly there is a context and a crap.
Too much?
You see how it's peaking?
Yeah.
It's because this channel, I already did that, and that was a good intro too. I won't delete it, but I do need to start over with a new track. I already compressed this track, remember, to hear it back? So it's already doing all of its... Now I need to remember what I was saying. Then clearly there is a context and a...
Why don't you just try doing another intro again, and then...
Yeah, we'll do that, and maybe we can splice some things in. I kind of liked that intro, though.
It was a good intro. Well, I know you, Austin. You'll just say the next one do better.
Try harder. Do better. Okay. The joys of podcasting. I don't have to do this too many times.
Well, yeah, it probably doesn't help that I messed up your entire setup.
Alright. Hello, New Age Christian family. This is Austin Fletcher, and this episode is the first episode of a series. I don't know if I would call it a series, but a type of episode I want to start doing for the New Age Christian podcast, where you actually get to hear from some people who call themselves New Age Christians. And today, I've mentioned her before a few times. Our first guest for this little experiment is Kayleen Hale. Say hi.
Hi.
She's a spiritual daughter of mine and a very close friend. We've been in relationship for about 4 years at this point. My wife and I, and her husband Ron. And the context for this episode and episodes like it is essentially, New Age Christianity is a new identity that some of us have decided to take on. And in the world that we live in, that phrase alone is kind of difficult for people to comprehend. It sounds like an oxymoron right out of the gate, right? A New Age Christian. The other day, we were out, my wife and I and Ron and Kaylee were out at a movie, and we ran into an old friend of ours who was wondering what was going on. We were talking, and at this point, we started talking about how Kaylee and I were going to be recording a podcast, and they asked what the name of it was, and I said, "Oh, it's New Age Christianity." and the look on his face at that point was absolutely priceless. Because, let's be honest, when you hear New Age Christianity and you come from that Christian world, heck, even if you come from the New Age world, those two words do not typically belong together. So, we want to start doing episodes with people like myself, like Kayleen. Do you want me to call you Kayleen or Kaylee?
Go for Kaylee. Make it simpler.
Okay. So, like Kaylee and others, and I want you to start hearing from them. And each one of us has our own journey, and this thing called New Age Christianity largely doesn't have a full identity yet. I'm doing what I can to give it an identity, but in the end, it's going to be the community that decides what it means to be a New Age Christian. So, welcome, Kaylee.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I am too. I've never done an interview podcast. I've never done an interview like this at all. So, we'll see how many cutouts and retakes we have to do.
So far, we're on number 2.
Yes, exactly. Oh, man. So I got a few, both Kaylee and I are verbal processors. So having 45 minutes of content is not going to be the problem today. But, so I have a few questions, and I'll set it up, and then I want to let you kind of talk. So you come from a Christian, you're a pastor's kid, right? A PK.
Correct.
And you're also homeschooled.
That I was.
So there's some context there rolling into an identity known as New Age Christian that I think our audience would find fascinating. I find it fascinating. But before we get there, just in general, because this podcast is about New Age Christianity as a whole, what does being a New Age Christian mean to you, or how would you define it?
Oh goodness, how to define something this vast? First of all, the community, as small as it currently is filled with a bunch of people who are living in their I am. And I know you've talked about that in different earlier podcasts about what that means. But like the easiest way to define that is the relationships that you have are with other powerful people. Other people who are not being victims, who are understanding their own creative energy. People who may not be happy with where they're at, but they are actively looking and learning and seeking and growing to create a new reality. So it's empowering. It's a strong community to be a part of. And personally, it's new, it's organic, and it's just very pure to be a part of. You're coming in, and I don't know, for me, being from the Christian community, it'd be like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in this or that, or like, having to set yourself apart from all this other stuff that you don't believe in. Or, yes, I'm a Christian, but I believe in miracles, I believe in, tongues, or I believe in all these other stuff. You have to framework it. New Age Christianity is still being defined, but a lot of it encompasses everything that, I believe so far. I don't have to define within that what sector I am.
Right.
So.
That is actually, that's a good start to this podcast. I hadn't actually considered, this is why I love talking to Kaylee, the insights into just the inner workings of ourselves, and realizing, oh my gosh, I haven't had to define my I amness to somebody in years by all the things I don't believe, right? I mean, we live in a culture where it's like, so what do you believe in? Well, I'm not really sure, but I can tell you all the things I don't believe in, right? And that is, it's kind of useless, right? So New Age Christianity is a community of people that, how would you simplify that?
A community of people, it's hard to explain because they're all so vast, but a lot of people who know that there's more and are actively searching out the more. That was one of the reasons that I got into it, is I knew there was more. I knew that Christianity did not have the answers that I was looking for. But it's also, like I said, a powerful place to be. It's a lot of creative energy, and just the understanding of relationship, for me, that was something I didn't find in Christianity. As much as they preach it, there was very few people living it, and a lot of those were the radical ones. But trying to have that relationship with Father and Spirit, what is that? And it was always vague answers. It was always this stuff, and it was just, it was great for when it was, but like you've talked about, the times, the ages, it no longer works. It's definitely, you can see how toxic it's becoming, and it's just dying from the inside out. So.
And that's something that you personally have a lot of personal experience in because of growing up as a PK, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm curious, as you have personally journeyed, I know a lot of your story. I know your parents. I actually worked with your father, an amazing dude, and in your sisters. I've worked with your sisters actually professionally. One of them, anyways, in a coffee shop, and different components. So I know your family fairly well, right?
And you
have above more than the rest of them have kind of taken on this identity of being a New Age Christian. And if you are comfortable, I'm curious of what some of the insights or nuggets or things that you would share with people that might have family that, for lack of a better way to say it, that these ideas are scary, that they care about your soul and they don't want you to go the way of the dodo bird,
Oh goodness. My parents are a little more open-minded than a lot of other Christians.
That's true.
Like Austin said, he worked with my dad for years in a church, and because of that, my dad is fairly understanding of the crazy man Austin Fletcher. My mom, not so much. She's definitely trying to be a little more open to you, but you and her definitely got off on the wrong foot. There's legendary stories about that for another day. But I know that there is definitely this concern that is very felt in my family for what I've become a part of, and like,
right.
What am I doing? And the hard thing for them in particular is that anytime they ask me questions, which I have told them that they can, that I'd be open with them, is that they can't find a reasonable thing to pull apart, that they can't find something that doesn't make sense. So that's the hardest thing for them, that this crazy religion that I'm a part of, or community, or belief system, I guess is the best way to put it, is it actually makes sense, that they can't pull it apart. I know that just before Christmas, my little sister came home. She's a very intelligent, very just smart individual, and likes to think things through. And like Austin says, he knows my family. She used to come to a Bible study. Yeah. Oh man, this had at least 7 years ago.
Yeah, I knew her. I knew the rest of your family way before I knew you. Yeah, I used to think she hated me, actually.
I was just unsocial and awkward, homeschooled. But my sister and I had a discussion right before Christmas, and I know that I pushed some of her buttons and unintentionally offended her and different stuff. But her hardest thing was, she actually said something to me where she was like, I hate arguing with Austin because he'll say all these things that sound so right, but I know what I believe, I just can't explain it. And it really hit a button with me going, if I can't explain what I believe, do I actually believe it? Right. Does it make sense to actually believe? Is it positive in my life if I can't define it?
Right.
So the hard thing with my family isn't so much that they don't understand it, it's just that it's scary. There is fear and it feels so wrong. I mean, being taught in the Christian year for years, I would say, like, I didn't truly leave that until I was probably 23. So I've been a part of it for 23 years, and going, I'm a God. I am and I am. Mm-hmm. That is terrifying to so many individuals, and that's where my family would have the hardest part going, but no, we are still separated. And I go, how?
Right.
And that's the hard part, is they can't explain to me how that there's still separation.
Right.
And that my answers make sense, and that scares them that there is more.
It's one of those things. It's like, Jesus looks right at the Pharisees and he says, guys, your scriptures say that you are gods. And they're like, we're going to kill you. Like, they literally, that is their response. So, like, that is their, like, we have nothing to say to you, but we're going to kill you because you just made me mad. And that is so some of you listening to this podcast at this point, we're only a few episodes in, and I know early on I referenced in one podcast, I don't know if you've heard it yet, I said something about along the lines of you being gods, and I was like, oh crap, wait a minute, I don't think people know that one yet.
I think that was episode 3, the one on honor. Because
Yes.
I have heard that one.
Yes, and so, my favorite, this is at the point which I always quote Thomas Troward, right? If anything is true, there's a way in which it is true, and we are not saying that we are the universal mind or that we are the creator of all the universe, but that we are like him, and that we, as Jesus says, do your scriptures not say that you are God's? And if that's the DNA of our father, then it's the DNA of our older brother, then it's the DNA of us, right? And that's the thing I hear for a lot of people is essentially it's uncomfortable, as you said. It's more of an energetic challenge than it is an intellectual challenge.
Oh, most certainly.
And the reason is just because the intellectual challenge actually has answers, and that's the oh no, like they want intellectual answers, and then you give them to them, and it leads them to the simple interpretation of those verses that are all throughout the Bible, where maybe you really are like him, maybe you really are sinless, maybe you really are perfect, and all of these other things.
But I find, like, in my personal experience when dealing with people who don't comprehend that, is that there's a responsibility to that.
Mm.
There is a matter of taking your life into your own hands. And you understanding that your life is manifesting what you believe. So if you don't like where you are in life, then maybe you need to check your own beliefs. And so it's very difficult to talk to somebody and tell them that their life is their fault.
Oh boy.
I know I just triggered so many buttons. I'm so sorry.
No, it's good. Unpack it.
But like I said, if our beliefs are what create us, what define us, both our conscious beliefs and our subconscious beliefs, and emotions, positive and negative, that are affecting us, both actually.
Yeah, right.
Like our life will reflect that. If you've been abused or hurt, how you will react to that in different ways throughout the rest of your life. It creates beliefs, it creates other stuff that are impacting you. I know that my relationship with my father has most certainly dictated my relationship with Father God.
Right.
Good and negative. And so when I say these beliefs are impacting you, it sounds awful, like, oh, so many people want to play the victim, or I guess are victims of their own.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, how could you dare say that? How could you say that they did this to themselves? Like, what kind of person are you? And that's where, well, Austin always says, hey, if you did this to yourself, you can undo it. You can change it. Like, hey, this is good news. We're saying you're not powerless. This life that you hate, yeah, we're saying it's your fault. But how much greater now because you can actually do something and change it.
Right. That's one of my favorite parts of The Secret, the movie, The Secret. One of the guys says, how dare you tell me, are you telling me that that bad client or that sickness or that debt or that whatever it is, that it's my fault? And he says, I'm here to be a little bit in your face and say, yeah, it is. And there's one of two reactions you can simply, well, one of three, I guess. The third reaction is you don't believe the law of attraction at all and you think it's a bunch of junk and you just ignore it. But the two main reactions are either you get mad and offended that I just told you that thing that happened to you was your fault, and I didn't ask to be. I mean, there's some really bad things that happen to people. People get raped. People get, murdered. Car accidents that kill. There's some really bad stuff. And to go, that was, you can't tell me that was my fault. And so they can get mad. Or the other reaction is to go, wait a minute. You mean I have control? I have the ability to affect my life, and I can actually take responsibility, but it is scary as heck. I mean, it is super scary to be responsible.
Yeah, you're choosing to say from now on, everything that happens to me is my fault. Hey, I'm in a dead-end job that I don't like. Well, this is my fault. Hey, I'm procrastinating. I want to be something, but I'm not doing it. Again, my fault.
Wow. Would you say that's one of the primary shifts that you've adopted, going from how you were raised to quote unquote New Age Christianity?
Most certainly. For me, at 18 years old, I can say 18 because I remember it was my senior year, and I remember realizing that the reason I didn't do well in school is because I believed I was stupid, and therefore I didn't put in effort because I already believed it. So therefore, why would I put in effort?
Right.
And I was aware enough to understand that's what I was actually doing, but I didn't know how to change it. I was stuck in this cycle, and I knew I was stuck in this cycle, but I didn't know how to, change.
Right.
And so that was one of the things that New Age Christianity really brought to me was how to change. I knew I needed it, but it gave me the how to do it.
Yeah, that's actually 2 episodes ago. By the time, depending on when this one goes live, I think it was episode number 9. I did how to keep your New Year's resolutions, and it was basically 5 how-tos of change, and a lot of the things that we know. One of my favorites is a more recent one is the reticular activating system inside your brain, right? So you're talking about believing you're stupid, and what it is think of all the data you have in front of you at any given time. That of all the things you could see, the noises you could hear, all of the inputs that are around you, especially if you're in a public place, all the people you could notice or not notice, all the cars that you could, pay attention to on the road or not pay attention to. Your brain has a system in the reticular activating system that actually is designed to filter out irrelevant information. Okay. Well, the definition of information that is relevant or irrelevant is the information that helps you survive versus this information that doesn't have anything to do with your survival. So it's literally a survival mechanism. When it comes to beliefs, it filters out all of the things that help your I amness survive. So if your I amness is I'm stupid, it will filter out everything that proves that wrong, and it will feed you everything that proves that right. Your brain will actually prove itself right because your identity is under attack. If you imagine, like, if you believed you believed you could fly, and yet everywhere you went, gravity was defeating you, you would think you were crazy, right? Because your brain is not. So your brain is actually designed to reinforce your identity. Otherwise, you'll think I'm crazy, And so it's there's so many nuggets and tools like that I think New Age Christianity, I've attempted to bring into this system and bring into this concept, because let's be honest, the self-help world, the New Age world, the quantum physics world, and all of the above, they have discovered some amazingly beautiful things. I believe they're all in the Bible, and they're all, not just the Bible, but they're all throughout Christianity historically and everything like that, but they just haven't been given a name, and they certainly are scary. So when people ask you, like, what do you believe, or what group are you a part of, or where do you go to church? Like, what do you tell them?
I have actually had this happen to me, and I'm trying to remember specifically, but it happened at Starbucks when my coworkers asked me, because I tend to have like radical views on a lot of random stuff.
Okay.
But it usually comes down to, I believe everything that's in the Bible, but I believe there's more. And that there's more to this coming age. It doesn't end with the Bible. It's just, that's the first part of the story. And so the New Age Christianity is just the next chapter, or the next, testament, if you want to go into that. So when you have, eternity at your fingertips, and you have all this belief in I am, so you understand that matter is a part of you, but it doesn't hold you back. And you're also spirit, and it's not about going to heaven. It's about bringing the kingdom to earth. It just brings empowerment, and it's about working with the Father to create, not just creating His plan.
I love, as you're talking, I'm like, okay, so if New Age Christianity, if we were to develop a concept or a language around it that basically couched it as, this is a continuation of the story. This is not a rewriting of the story. It's not challenging all the norms. And it really is. It's look, the 2,000 years of churchianity is over. I'm sorry, but it is.
Hate to break it to you.
Yeah, it's the churchianity is over. Just look around. And then before that, it was 2,000 years of the law, Hebraic law. That's over. And the 2,000 years before that, like, so time is continuing, and New Age Christianity is not trying to rewrite history or replace what's happened.
Mm-mm.
It's just trying to continue the story. And for those of you who are wondering, like, the Bible is full of references and things that allude to, guys, there's more. There's more coming. There's another age coming. Just do a search and look at the scriptures. look at the scriptures where Jesus talks about the age to come. And you'll start, a lot of those references are misunderstood for being heaven, I believe. So that's the radical views you're talking about. Like, we actually believe immortality is for here. We believe the kingdom is here. We believe perfection is here. We believe that self-government is the way of the future. Like, all of these things that aren't just for heaven, but they're for now.
How dare we believe such radical views? How could God create a world that could actually sustain itself?
Right, and that is another thing. Like, I want to start doing, because New Age Christianity needs to get out of that churchianity system that says we're religion and then there's life over here, and that talking about politics and talking about technology and talking about business and everything like that. I love there's a new industry that's kind of popping up with the internet the way it is now. I can't remember the guy's name who coined the phrase, but kind of the youpreneur. Instead of entrepreneur, it's the youpreneur, where it's basically there's these communicators. Tony Robbins is a perfect example, where he's an entrepreneur, but he's also a speaker, and he's got these. And what's happening is that the pastor of the future looks like Tony Robbins, right? Honestly, the church of the future looks like this. It looks like podcasts. It looks like books. It looks like digital media. And then the projects, the beautiful thing is the Tony Robbins community has nonprofit projects they do. They have the things that the church has been good at for 2,000 years, but it's rolling it into the next age. Sorry, that's a little bit of my soapbox.
Well, that's okay.
So I have, and this one it's a bit personal.
Okay.
Right? So you don't have to you can be as detailed as you want or not. But coming from church, pastor's kid, homeschooled, and the journey, I mean, we talked a bit about some of the challenges that you've had and how your family has perceived you. But for you personally, ignoring what else is, what was the most difficult thing to address, to kind of, when, I don't know if you're like me, and I feel like a lot of people, we dabble and we dabble and we dabble in something new, but at some point we decide, no, this is what I'm going to do, right? So for you, do you remember what it was, if it was one or two or three things like that were the most difficult for you to resolve in no longer dabbling with New Age Christianity, but actually embracing it?
I don't know if I had a hard time embracing New Age Christianity. Partially because I was on the journey with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it came in stages. It came in like we said, we've known each other for 4 years, but before actually knowing Austin, I went to that church and I heard you preaching for years before that.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as he said before he thought I hated him, actually he was my favorite person to listen to. He always made the most sense and had the best put together sermons.
Yes.
Personally, that's what I always thought. You can ask my husband. You were his favorite too.
I was.
No. Awesome. But the thing is coming from the church, being a pastor's kid, I saw the corruption of the church, and there is a lot of corruption, and it's just about always tied to money. But we didn't know.
Speaking of which, we accept donations.
But one of the first churches that I really considered home split up because of money, and we were forced together with another church, and it was a mess, and it just gave me so much anger. And then going back to another church when I first got married, and I was in Grand Rapids, going to this big mega church, and just seeing stuff. And like, I go in with very open eyes, and I was already very much a skeptic, I guess.
By that point, yeah.
Yeah, and being able to see things going, I know that's not true. And I know enough people that know the pastor and know what's going on that I know that this is how they specifically do things. That they tell the college age group, like pastor, that they have to do an offering call, even when the pastor, like the college age group, didn't want to. He's like, this is college kids, they're broke, we don't want to do that. We don't want them to think that's why we have them. But the church told them that they had no choice, so that they had to do that. And I'm going, this is supposed to be a community that cares about people, that are supposed to help with people's finances, and it sounds like it's all about their bottom line. And it's hard to, like, knowing, not that I have a problem with people in ministry making a lot of money, I really don't. But it was knowing that, like, when the church could help out in situations, they didn't unless it made them look bad. Yeah. And that the pastor was building his, like, second beautiful, massive lake house.
Right.
And I know it was massive because I've seen it. That sucker had a lot of bedrooms and prime real estate. Like, and again, I don't have a problem with people in ministry making money. I hope to be making a lot of money someday.
Right.
But it was the fact of how much they put pressure on money, but never understood the value of it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's manipulation.
Very much.
As you said, I mean, corruption is, ugh. So was that two? So that was you.
That was one of the reasons that I was like, this doesn't work. What the problem is that I had enough experiences with Spirit and enough experiences with Father and miracles that I knew that the Bible made sense. Okay. And I knew enough about creation and science, just enough for me to know that I had this unbreakable faith in the Bible. But the entire church system just didn't make sense to me. So I thought we needed to do church better.
How'd that go?
Well, there was this church called North Point, and they tried. And
we tried really hard.
That's where Austin and my father worked together, and it did a lot of good. It did. It wasn't a complete failure. It brought a lot of people together. Actually, there's some people from the community that are from there. Yeah. So, I mean, it didn't fail, but it didn't work. Yeah. Long term, it wasn't sustainable. Finding that you're just bringing in a bunch of people that pretty much want to feel good about themselves, worship, go to that place of worship, feel that connection with Spirit, but actually making real change in people's lives. We weren't seeing much of it. Right. We were able to get out, like, the grace message, but then you were just having a lot of Jesus-loving people with freedom, which is great, but there was no responsibility. There was no taking their I amness, taking that next step. It just stopped at that. Which isn't horrible, but when there's so much more, it's disappointing.
And that's I struggle with. I feel like, I know you well enough to know that there's certain personalities, right, that we want to change the world. Like just a little bit. Just a bit. And so it's like this driving passion for us. And I think North Point largely taught me the value of there is absolute beauty in people who just want to live that quiet life. I mean, actually, Paul talks about finding that kind of that center point of just I'm in the kingdom, I'm living in the kingdom, my family's great, my life is great, and yet I view church largely as kind of having, and I've mentioned it multiple times on the podcast, of the three goals of church in my mind are learning, right? Personal growth or spiritual growth, whatever you want to call it, community, and then action. Like, let's actually do something. What's funny?
What? Action? What is this madness?
Right. So, and that's the one that, like, you'll find different churches that have these different drives. Like, we're all about community, we're all about community, we're all about community. Or we're all about learning, we're all about learning, we're all about learning. Or we're all about action, action, action. It's very difficult. And I think that, and I've mentioned it before, the best model I've ever seen that can do all three of those is Bethel. They're clearly doing a lot in the world, but I think of the different components, they have strengths and weaknesses. We all do, and New Age Christianity will as well. But
I feel like though with Bethel, one of the reasons they have kind of got all three is they also have three main people in leadership. And if you really look at them, each of them kind of hold a specific one.
Right.
Like, I mean, Danny Silk, he's community. He created that culture of honor. If he wasn't there, Bethel would not have that.
Right.
So,
yeah, then you got Bill with the action. He's all about kingdom, go get stuff done.
Right.
And then you've got Chris.
Yeah.
Who's learning in the school and stuff.
Which is phenomenal. But that's what the next age needs to look like. We need to be working with people that are different from us, that have those different callings, those different natural bents. I mean, there's many times that, even as my spiritual father, we've seen that while we're both verbal processors, we are so very different.
Yes.
Austin knows that he cannot tell me to do research because that will be the last thing I will ever do. Like, he's like, why don't you go research this? And I'm like, yeah, I'd rather go hit my head against the wall really hard. But if you tell me something is exciting and has some great information on how to know people better, I'm like all about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the New Age Christianity to me is attempting to make this spirituality thing so open that you don't have to build a community around one type of personality, right? And it's difficult, like, because we're all trained, right? We're on marketing and the internet and how all this works. I mean, it could be very easy for people for New Age Christianity to be built around just my personality or just yours or anybody else's. But innate within it, in the idea in my mind, innate within innate within New Age Christianity itself is that it's open enough and free enough that all types of people find themselves fully capable of embracing this idea and this identity. And that's arguably the biggest challenge from an organizational standpoint, because how do you rally people to like so many different flags? But I think the road's ready for it if we can just figure out how to crack that code and I want to introduce these podcast listeners to people such as yourself, because Kaylee, you are very relational, you are very very much into the community side of things, and that is something that, while I value it, the moment I open my mouth, we've talked about this actually, we do there's a private community on Facebook, for those of you who I haven't talked about on the podcast yet, but we do have a private community, and it's really meant for that. It's meant for community. The studies and the information and stuff like that is different, and when I go into that community discussion, I'm running into the problem where I can't really open my mouth much, or else if I open my mouth too much, it starts, both by my own bent and my own passions, but also just energetically, it kind of turns into a teaching session, and that's one of the things that we're hoping to kind of remedy in how church often works.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the things that we're learning, is how to have a community where somebody who is a teacher is also a friend.
Yeah.
And a brother, and have, that honor in different places.
That was one of the things your dad really tried to do, was pull down he asked me to be, her father was the senior pastor of this church for a while, and then wanted to kind of create a plurality of leadership and asked me to be engaged. And the goal was to kind of remove the Moses on the mountain and kind of bring the top down, so that you could just be friends and still teach. And it's a really difficult thing for those of us who grew up in churchianity. It's really difficult for us to view each other in those lights.
it's a real bummer, and I can say that because like I've seen it in your life and also my father's.
Right.
Because people who know my dad as a friend versus people who know my dad as the pastor he was have often said he's completely different. Like, my dad is very engaging to listen to. He's a very engaging speaker. He's very well put together. Like, he was phenomenal at it. He had 20 years under his belt easily, and he knew what he was doing. But the guy at home, like, hilarious. Like, when he did Bible time with us, he would randomly insert random names to see if we were even paying attention. Like, and, you know, Bible time was very interesting, and my dad is a very funny, punny guy. My dad is the dad joke king. And just all these things that people wouldn't otherwise know, and it wasn't because my dad wasn't willing to show them. It's because people were very intentional about putting my dad in this place of teaching only.
Right.
My dad craved relationships with people. And I mean, the four of you guys, the four people that became the other pastors, like, had all great relationships. I mean, I know you know a different side of my dad than even I do because of that. But how often would it be that he was just trying to create friends? Like, when I said the first church broke, like that one about money a while back, then my dad started North Point. The only reason he started that was because his friends from that church wanted him to be their pastor again. He just wanted to be friends. He was okay with going to another church. He wasn't needing to be that. My dad has his accounting degree. My dad had other opportunities. He didn't need to be a pastor. But it was the fact that people that he considered friends wouldn't let him be just a friend.
Right.
So that is definitely a struggle that is very relevant in this life, and especially what we're dealing with right now. But the great thing is that we understand that, and we know that we can grow and change. So, guys, I'm here to tell you, Austin's nuts. He's got a great sense of humor. He loves movies, and he's great to have just a conversation with about life. And not spiritual, not that stuff. I mean, New Age is life in some ways, but your movie quotes are legendary. Like,
yes. My timing is legendary. I like to think so anyway.
Though he gets a little upset with me because I only can guess about 50% of his. Did you know where that's from? No. I was sheltered.
It's like a running theme for me lately. Like, people are like, you know, you're different than I thought you were, and I'm like, dadgummit. Freaking religion. Like,
how dare you have a sense of humor, Austin?
Yeah, no, well, it surprises people, and I'm like, seriously? But it's the system we've lived in where it's, well, you're the teacher. And that is so we do the community, that private group does a community call, a live call, once a month, the first Sunday night of every month. And we just had one last night, and, you know, trying to develop community, it is that, man, right now, every time I open my mouth, and part of it's my fault, it's just my personality, and I step right into teacher mode or insightful philosopher mode really darn quick. But that's who I am as a person, so being able to be me freely in a group of people, and that's why, hence, a podcast about meeting somebody else who calls themselves a New Age Christian. So I have one last question for you.
Oh, no.
No, that's good. So, New Age Christianity, and it's everything we've talked about and all the dynamics, and there's so many things we didn't talk about, clearly. But what impact do you think New Age Christianity could or should have on the world?
Oh, goodness. Wow. That is not a light question. So for me, personally, I'm very much about people. I'm very much about how people work. So there are so many great implications as far as like nature and like lifespan and all that other stuff. But for me, I think about the powerful side, the responsibility that if this became global, people would not be able to play the victim. People would understand if they're offended, they kind of have to deal with it themselves. And it's an opportunity for growth. And one of the main things that I know that Austin and I very much agree on, that like you need to be growing, that life, I mean, there are definitely times of rest and other stuff, but even in that there's growth. But it's all about moving forward and growing in that. Hopefully a year from now the podcast will sound very different and we'll have different things to say.
Right.
Then from now, that means we're growing. That means that we're learning. So if we're dealing with a global scale of that, I mean, how incredible is that? There's so many people that get into a job and just get stuck. And I'll hear people say, like, you'll learn something new every day, but they're talking about, like, how a machine works. Or, like...
I learned WordPress, yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that, which are all well and good, but if you could learn stuff on an emotional scale, on a belief scale, like, if you can learn communication better. I mean, on this journey, I've learned stuff about communication. I've learned stuff about love languages. I've learned leadership skills. I've learned so many other stuff that for me relationally is very important to me. I've also learned, about Jesus being, logic and all that other stuff that is phenomenally important. But some of the stuff that I've found that I'm using in my day-to-day life are those other skills that just being in the community of growth has brought out organically.
Right.
I mean, a lot of those things that I just mentioned came up just because you and I were in the same space talking. I know that's where verbal processor versus internal processor really came into play, was when we realized that in the office when we were working with Chris.
Right.
And how,
oh my gosh. Sorry, Chris.
We're both verbal processors, as we mentioned, so it meant that when we got talking, no work got done. Ever. We would look at the clock and it was 2 hours later, and that was supposed to be like a half-hour lunch break.
But we were getting work done.
We were learning stuff.
Because as verbal processors, that is part of your process.
It was. That period, for me especially, was significant growth.
Right.
The amount that I learned working with you and Chris was just incredible. And that's actually where this fathering relationship began. So.
Yeah. Christopher Teasdale is another individual that many of you will be hearing from soon. The three of us
tie him down and make him do
right.
this.
He's a busy guy, but the three of us worked in 2017 for about 6 months on the Epic, which I've mentioned on the podcast before. So, anyways, impact on the world. You're thinking it sounds obviously on that relational, personal level.
It's gotta be. It's got to be about the individuals, because once it becomes more, because so much about the church is being the body, which is great, but until we understand being the individual I am, we can't be the body. So I think there's going to be a little bit more focus on that to be the next step. We've been trying to skip ahead for about 2,000 years, and we can't do that until we take a step back and look at ourselves, and then we can start moving forward. And that's when community comes in, and that's when growth comes in, and that's when wonders and all that comes in.
I don't think I have anything else to add to that. So.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being the guinea pig. So now everyone has to measure up to this amazing episode. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for joining us for this conversation and our first interview with a New Age Christian. It's like an alien. We just interviewed some weird thing. Anyways, we love you guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.